welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now, today's show, come on, every time I come on every week, I'm really happy to be here and spend this time with you, but today is going to be an extra special day for a variety of reasons, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But let me introduce my guest first. To my immediate left, we have Mr. Michael McCormack, who is one of those guys that just knows politics. I mean, he probably knows more about politics than half of us will ever know. He's a lawyer, and he's been gracious enough to come on the show today, and we're going to talk about some of the races that are coming up in 2014. We'll look at 2016. We're also going to talk about the breakfast, but I'll get to that in a second. And next to Mr. McCormack, on his left, is Mr. William Forry, my fellow BC Eagle in the house. Right. You gotta love it, which is a beautiful thing. And Bill, as you all know, is from the Forry dynasty in Dorchester, but also the Dorchester Reporter, Haitian Reporter, I believe Mattapan Reporter, several newspapers, and they do a real great public service by making sure that you and I and all of their followers know what's going on in the city and throughout metropolitan Boston. So without any further ado, gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm just psyched about this. Mike, I'm going to skip over you for a second because I got to get to Bill for a second and just talk about the breakfast, which I thought was extraordinary. It was a lot of fun, breath of fresh air. Now, being on the inside, putting together, talk to us about it. Was it really climbing a mountain to get that thing up and going?
It was for Linda, I think, and for her, her immediate staff, not only at the State House, but the team she assembled to put it all together. There was a whole foundation created. It's $100,000 plus budget for that event, which you have to raise privately, obviously, and that was the biggest hurdle, I think. Linda, as you could tell, had no, that I could see, had no nerves about the event. She was very calm and like, I thought very poised in pulling it all together and being a performer in that sense. But the work that did go into it, they were, aside from me, and I played a limited role actually in just kind of counseling her and helping her with some material, but Sean Pierce, who's in her office, was the key person. He did a great job. Other people like my father, Ed Forry, helped out quite a bit with fundraising. Doug Hurley with volunteers. They were really cast of dozens in terms of the core group. But yeah, it was a daunting task from the outset, and so it was very rewarding to see it pulled off fairly well. I think very well in most people's estimations. So I'm delighted for her, and I'm proud as her husband. I'm proud for our family that we were able to be there and play a role in something like that. I used to go to the breakfast, and we were talking about before the show, back in the day, like in the 80s, when Bill Bulger would host it at the Bayside Club, and I'd scale. Everyone talks about scaling the fire escape to get up into the room. I'm not sure if that was kosher with the Boston Fire Department, what was going on back in those days, but it was a very small room, and it was a different event. The television cameras weren't there often, or if they were, they weren't broadcasting to the region the way yesterday's breakfast was done. But it's come a long way, and yesterday's event was really, I don't know, for those of us who grew up in this area and understand the meaning of that political roast and the cultural nature of it, it was a monumental event.
And that's what I want to ask you, Mike. So how important was it to have a good breakfast this year? And the controversy surrounding the parade notwithstanding, the parade still went off, and it was very well attended, as it always is. What does it say about the city coming together? I mean, at one point, there was a comment made that I believe there was a lot of diversity up on at the head table. There were several folks of color. There were 6 or 7 women up there. What does that mean for the city and where we are heading as a Commonwealth?
Well, I was actually delighted. I did not go to the breakfast. I watched it, and I was delighted and very happy for Linda. I thought she did terrific. I mean, she really is an entertainer. When she gets out of politics, she has another career for sure. And the breakfast, frankly, had gotten a little stale, so I thought she gave it a real boost and uplifted the event. It was interesting to see. I remember going to the breakfast back in the 80s when Bill Bulger was the MC, and it essentially was sort of middle-aged white guys. Now it's a different city, and that was reflected in the dais, and the people who were there. I thought it was very cool to see.
Yeah, if you look in the audience, it was jam packed with it was that rainbow coalition that Mel King used to talk about back in the day. One of the things, Bill, that I found interesting, someone said, everybody from South Boston, raise your hand, and there was like 4 or 5 or 6 hands, and then said everybody from Dorchester, raise your hands, and just about everybody out in the audience raised their hands. Does that mean there's a power shift now in that area away from South Boston towards Dorchester?
Well, I mean, there has been a demographic power shift in terms of the way that Senate seat is carved, and so obviously, and that was reflected in Linda's victory last year. It was essential to it. But I mean, I think, I don't know, maybe some of the Southie people didn't want to raise their hands. There was a good amount of South Boston people in that room.
Yeah.
There was a lot of Dorchester people, and half of them were probably related to me, to be honest with you, in some form or fashion. But that's the nature of that event. It is one of those things where the senator who hosts it invites her, her people, and you invite not only your neighborhood people, but your supporters and people who've been helpful to you politically and whatever, but also people who aren't necessarily on your side of the aisle. There were a lot of people there from South Boston who, frankly, didn't support Linda in her election or don't agree with her politics, but it's a day to put that aside. It really is. I mean, I know it's a political event, but it is one of those things where you don't just invite your core friends.
Yeah.
They're there too, but you want your new friends or people you hope to be your friends to be there as well. And it is one of those things where you can. And I think that's why Linda, quite honestly, was covetous of the event when she won. She didn't want to surrender it to someone else or relinquish it as something the senator has for many reasons. But one is that it is a political jewel, and it's something that gives you a lot of power.
Mike, another two-part question. How fortuitous was it that Linda or the committee was able to get the Prime Minister from Ireland to attend the event, and how unfortuitous was it that Bill Linehan did not attend the event?
Well, I thought the fact that the Prime Minister, Mr. Kenny, was there was terrific. I thought he was just wonderful. I mean, he had a nice way about him, very prepossessing, very likable. I think the fact that Bill wasn't there was unfortunate. I'm a little surprised. Bill's a friend of mine. He's a very, very nice guy, and I think he made a mistake. I think he should have been there, and I don't know why he chose not to be, but it's sort of yesterday's newspaper.
Just to jump on that, I think, first on Billy Linehan's side, first of all, Linda felt, I think, all along, they did disagree early on who should host the breakfast. But after that, Billy really didn't intrude or try to obstruct anything with the breakfast. I think, I'll let somebody else judge the Limerick decision. But I will say, it did give Linda a lot of material to use. Obviously, it ended up being a frequent punchline, not only from Linda, but everyone else up there. Yeah. But Billy was a good sport about it in the sense that he sent in his own video, which kind of poked fun at himself, and he noted that he wished Linda good luck, and he'd done that privately. So I know that from outside appearances, it may be that there's some sort of great feud there, and maybe we come from Ireland and sees the material, he may feel differently too. But we'll see. And I think at the end of the day, to speak to the Enda Kenny piece, the Taoiseach, Linda had met him several times prior to this event, so she was able to. She had a pre-existing relationship there and was able to extend an invitation. So it kind of speaks, Linda is uniquely situated to run this kind of event. Despite the obvious ethnic, difference there, she had been, because of her role and because of her family connections, she knew the Taoiseach and was able to extend that invitation. We were delighted he was able to do it.
And that extends, her personality also extends to quieting down any discussion about a feud between her and anybody else, frankly, because Linda does have that way about her. I mean, she's just a very vivacious young lady, very personable, and funny as all heck, man. I mean, she is just a good lady.
My sense is that Bill Linehan knew he was going to get whacked, whether he was there or not, and he said, you know what? Maybe I'll be in Ireland. Maybe I won't be sitting there when they start the jokes. And
the best advice is make sure you're there next year.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll probably be less of a target, but also you can fire back and have some fun with everyone else, and that's what it should be about, right?
And interestingly, just throw a little bit of a different swerve on it here. I grew up in Brighton, and I know Bill and Sheriff, you went to school there. My son's at BC. The breakfast that Bill Bulger hosted and John Powers, I think, before him, was foreign travel for people from Brighton. To people who, like me, who grew up there, like, what is this all about? Okay. It was fun. It was really entertaining. We never got tired of it. It's I'm delighted to see it back. I really am.
Yeah, no, it was a fun day, and hopefully next year for the parade, you know, everything kind of figures itself out. I know the new mayor Walsh worked really hard to see if they could find some common ground with getting the LGBT group in there, and I think they actually went pretty far downfield. You know, and so maybe after this is all said and done this year, they'll have a little more time without as much rush to really talk about how that can happen effectively next year.
It's hard.
It is 2014. We should be able to solve.
It's hard to you know, navigate an impasse like that on a deadline. It's better off negotiated and maybe done offline when months in advance, when there's not the pressure and the media scrutiny. Which, you know, speaking as a media person, I understand both sides, but coming to a resolution under the glare of the Globe and other entities following your every move on it is really almost impossible. Yeah,
yeah. So folks at home, if you didn't see it, I'm sure it's on NECN's website or YouTube. Pull it up. You'll enjoy it. It started out great, and I thought it ended pretty darn well, too, with the joke that, well, actually, two things that Charlie Baker did. One, you know, the discussion about, or the talk about, the tribute to the Dropkick Murphys, you know, and what they had done for the fallen servicemen who had come back, and how they really embraced that family, which was, I thought, very touching. And then he followed that up with the limerick, which I thought was just all funny as all get out, you know.
It was a big hit, and you know, I have to say, in the post-breakfast discussion, and maybe this because he was the last one up, but he was on people's lips, and he did himself some good.
Oh, he did.
He did himself some good, and I guess that's probably a good segue into other topics here.
To talk about all of the political races that are coming in politics. Can you believe that? We've got another race coming up, huh?
Sure.
You love it, huh? Look at you, political
yes,
junkie. So let's dive right into it. 2014, you've got all the constitutional officers. You've got the state senators, you've got the state reps. Everybody's out there this year running for office. Let's quickly look at the field. Let's start with the gubernatorial office, the governor's office. You've got 5 candidates, 5 pretty, I think I've had an opportunity to hear a lot of them speak, and I've had a chance to meet all of them. Really good people, really decent people. Let's start with you, Mike. What's your thought on the 5 that are out there? Who's going to come out of the convention as the guy or gal?
Well, I think almost importantly is who's running. It's also who's not running. Deval Patrick, a very seasoned campaigner, a very popular governor. So now you have 5 Democrats. You know, the presumptive convention favorite is Steve Grossman, and Martha Coakley will do well. The 3 sort of non-incumbent candidates, Juliet Kayyem, Dr. Berwick, and Dr. Avalone, are actually very good. The question then becomes, is 15% too high a bar for them? And you know, I would think that Grossman and Martha Coakley will have no problems certainly getting the 15%. I think there's some pressure on Martha Coakley to do well at the convention. She may not win it, but I think she has to do well to sort of sate the political activists who still have this memory of her losing to Scott Brown. So they want to see some real effort by Martha Coakley at the convention, and so we'll see.
Bill, you may know this a little bit more intimately than I, or maybe you, Mike. Did she do well in the caucuses with getting delegates? Do you know? Did she come out of that good? I know I'm told that Grossman came out very well. How did Martha?
I understood that Attorney General Coakley was behind Grossman considerably, but still ahead of the rest of the pack, and so that she was comfortably within the margin, obviously, to clear a threshold of 15%, which is what you need out of 5,000 some odd delegates in June. It's not likely all 5 of these are going to get to 15, right? So I mean, you figure with Grossman being kind of the heavy in this field, and I think he is at this point the favorite going into the convention in terms of getting a nomination. You know, she's very competitive with him, and she will have. Obviously, she'll have to kind of show that she's strong in contention with the other 3 that are kind of these new faces. She's an incumbent attorney general. She's run statewide several times now, and so she'll have to show that strength at the convention. I think to really be competitive with Grossman in September, and that's a long ways off still. But my read of it right now is it is going to be a 4-person.
You think so? You think so? You think 4 will get on?
I think, yeah.
Okay. And that would be, would you think, Juliet and possibly Dr. Berwick?
One of the 2 doctors, I think, has a shot. And I do hear a good buzz on Dr. Berwick in particular in terms of appealing to a hard progressive vote. He's a good speaker. He does capture a room. I've heard some people, I was surprised to hear describe him to Governor Patrick in that respect, in the way he could grab a room and hold them in his hand, and they like his policies. There have been some endorsements that have broken his way because of that. So I wouldn't count him out, and I think that both him and Julia Kayyem have a certain potential down the road to catch fire. There is an appetite among our electorate here that we've seen before of wanting to see a face you haven't seen before, and let's see what they have to say. And I think the Democratic primary voter is, if there's anyone in the state that's likely to go that way, it's a Democratic primary voter in September.
You know, Mike, so what I've been hearing of late is a lot of buzz about Julia Kayyem. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to her or speak with her. Excuse me. Let's put Steve Grossman and Martha Coakley aside for a second, assuming that they will cross that 15% threshold. What's your thought on the other 3? You know, who may get on, and who has been the most kind of impressive or impactful to you?
Well, I know Juliet Kayyem through her work as a journalist, and certainly she wrote for the Globe. She's an assistant Homeland Security person. I think Juliet's best friend is Steve Grossman. It does not help Martha Coakley's candidacy at all if there's another woman on the ballot. So I think you'll see Steve Grossman doing his very best to win the convention, and then spinning off as many convention votes or delegate votes for Juliet, just so that there'll be a second woman on that Martha Coakley will have to deal with. Dr. Berwick's good. I happen to know Joe Avalone from Wellesley, where I used to live, and I live in the city now. And Joe's a really thoughtful, smart, bright guy. I don't know if he has the ability to raise the money, really, which is sort of how you define it, but it's a very, very good field. All 5 candidates are very good.
Yeah. Let me ask you about Kayyem for a second. So I was talking to some folks about the possibility that Grossman may spin off some delegates to get her on, and what came back was, yeah, but what if she catches fire? Right. You know, so he gets her on, and then she could be this turn's Deval Patrick. Right. You know, she catches fire, and so there was that. It would be good to have her on if, in fact, you know, he needed another woman on the ballot. But what if she catches fire? What do you think of that?
I think that's going to be a game week decision at the convention. I think from now until this race, and to your credit, you're bringing some attention to it that it really hasn't had, honestly, on a broad scale. It's just starting to get on people's radar. So as people are starting to tune into this, I realize hardcore Democrats in the caucuses in February were dealing with this and making decisions, but most people aren't. So I think, yes, you can play that 1-2 cute, and you could bring in somebody into the race who could catch fire and really catch fire in August and September. But the other factor that he's going to be looking at is he doesn't want to lose donors. He needs a big war chest if he is successful in September to take on Charlie Baker. And he's clearly going to be he's the presumptive nominee.
Yeah. What does this race cost, ballpark? What do you think? How much is it going to run? $5 million?
I think it's probably north of that.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Sure. Probably $7 to $8 million.
Really? Okay.
Which is what folks fail to realize. Massachusetts, we cap the amount of money that you can contribute individually to $500, and lobbyists to $200.
That's right.
To raise $5, $6, $7 million is a staggering amount of money. We don't have unlimited resources.
Although aren't there some organizations that can go beyond that and give you thousands of dollars, I believe?
Oh, sure. Okay. I mean, you can, the recent, not that recent now, Supreme Court decision allowed corporations to give money, and maybe they will, but there hasn't been a real history of that in the governor's race. We saw it in the mayor's race.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see.
I do think because of the changed nature, and we've seen now the precedent with the mayor's race, there will be that sort of money funneled in. And so I do think you're going to see the sum go up this year as a direct result of that. So you're right. Outside money, special interest money that is going to be able to be channeled through large corporate donations will play a role in this race too.
Okay, so hypothetically, 4 folks get on. Pick whatever 4. 4 folks get on. How bad do they potentially hurt each other going into the grand finale? I mean, when you've got 4 folks out there, you've got to start to carve out some turf. Now, in the mayor's race, I thought that was exceedingly civil. I'm not sure that we'll see the same thing in the gubernatorial race. Let's start with you, Mike. What's your thoughts?
Well, the last poll that I saw, Martha Coakley was, I don't know, 40 points ahead.
But wasn't that an anomaly, though, I think, because it was early?
Well, it wasn't that long ago.
Okay.
So I think that the burden is on Steve Grossman to win the convention and come out of there with a big boost.
Okay.
And my sense is that, you know, Massachusetts, we don't have races that you have in Illinois where people are.
My wife is from Illinois. That's
Oh
a
my
whole
God.
different.
They're great.
That's a whole different political.
I love to read about it. I'm, you know, I love, you know, Massachusetts are much more civil. You know, you have 2 incumbent constitutional office holders. They're not going to go out and start trashing each other. I mean, they may be critical and say I'm better equipped to be governor, but I don't sense any real negative campaigning.
I don't think they go too hard on each other, but there has been some early skirmishes already between Steve Grossman and Martha Coakley, and because they are the 2, you know, heaviest contenders in the field. But yeah, you know, they do have to be careful not to tear each other down completely. One of them's going to have to get through into November. But I think in the other respect, it will be helpful to them to go through a tough race. I think it is helpful usually to have to let voters see how you withstand the scrutiny of other candidates and to give you a test of your own field organization, to give you a test of your own platform and your own you know, mettle.
Yeah.
And so I think it'll be useful for the Democrats in this field. Charlie Baker's an excellent candidate. He's going to be a tough guy to beat, to be blunt about it. You could see that.
You think he learned from the last race? Do you think he's grown?
I think he's grown. I think he's learned some tricks. I think he's actually, if you saw him on Sunday, we were talking about the breakfast. He seemed to be in fighting shape. He's actually slimmed down a bit. He's a very imposing guy. He's a very tall man.
Right.
He has the characteristics of a winner. And so these Democrats are going to have to really be on the top of the game in the fall to be competitive. The cyclical nature, as we know, of the state electorate is not favoring Democrats this time. It just isn't. We've had a Democratic administration that's performed very well, but still, people tend to like to see what the other side has to offer. I think that's also a factor in this race. So Charlie Baker has an advantage built in going into this thing, in my view, because he is in a solo lane right now. There is a Tea Party candidate running against him.
Right.
He's not likely to be a real factor. So you know, they're going to have to be careful, this 5 or 4 person field, whatever it ends up being, of not destroying each other going into September.
Hey, and just to follow up what Bill said, Charlie's got the luxury of not spending a lot of money in the primary, whereas the Democratic primary, they're going to use up all their treasure, and Charlie's going to have the ability and the luxury to raise money and sit on it.
So I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the 4 prior governors before Deval Patrick, were all Republicans. Am I correct? I think it was Romney, Swift, Paul Cellucci, Weld.
And Bill Weld.
Yeah.
That's right.
So is the Commonwealth a place where, okay, so we're heavily Democratic, but we like that corner office to be Republican? Is that?
Well, we kind of like the balance of a Republican governor, maybe keeping an eye on the legislature. And Charlie reminds me a lot of Bill Weld, who was one of my favorite all-time elected officials in Massachusetts. He was just great. And Bill had a nice way about him.
Yeah.
He was fun. He was a blast. He was fun to be around. You know, he got along with Democrats. He really didn't get along all that well with the crazed Republicans. You know, the moderate Republicans and Democrats love Bill Weld.
Yeah.
And I think that's the path that Charlie's trying to hew to.
Would you say Charlie's more of a moderate Republican versus either side? Is he a moderate? Is he somewhere in the middle?
Well,
for
we'll
the
see.
Republicans?
What's interesting about it is in 2010, if you ask me, I'd say no, he's skewing right. And I think he was following a national trend at the time, which was kind of in a reaction of some sorts to President Obama and sort of a, trying to ride that tide of sort of an anti-government almost sentiment. I think this time around he'll probably track more to the middle, but he'll also be trying to capitalize on some high-profile troubles that the administration has had, both federal and state level, and so there's some running room for him to be there without seeming like a Tea Party crazy. He can run moderate, but still be kind of a fierce critic of a one-party rule in the state, which that's a recipe for a potential victory.
So does he turn up the volume when you talk about being a fierce critic? Does he turn up the volume in the coming months as we get closer to the convention on the outgoing administration or on the Democratic, potential Democratic candidates?
Well, so
he...
far he has not been, I don't think, terribly critical of Governor Patrick.
Right. Okay.
I think he needs those votes. I mean, 50% of the voter are unenrolled and/or Republicans are 13%, 14%. Okay. So he needs the votes, and Deval Patrick is still a very popular governor. So I don't see where the benefit to Charlie is to beat up Deval Patrick. I think he's looking at the field in front of him, the 4 and 5 folks we've been talking about, and say that's my opposition.
What's your thought?
Yeah, I think it's going to be targeting more of an amorphous Democratic establishment, the legislature and the governor, and just every function of government that the state knows is controlled by Democrats. And there is a gene within Massachusetts voters that is uneasy with that at some level, and they've shown that in the past. So I do think, without being personal towards the governor or anybody else necessarily, if there's a front runner that emerges out of this pack clearly, then he probably will. But like Mike said, he doesn't need to until after the primary, really. So we'll see, and a lot can change between now and then. But I do think he will be a sharp critic.
Okay. All right, we're going to go to a break in a moment, but before we do that, when we come back on the other side, we'll talk about some of the other races. But before we go to the break, I got to ask, you may not answer, I got to ask, so who goes up against Baker? Who is it? Who's going to be the one?
Well, since you asked the question, I'll answer it honestly. I think it's Martha Coakley's to lose.
Okay.
I just think that she's got a lot going for her, particularly the fact she's a woman. She's going to draw down a lot of union support. She's an incumbent attorney general, although attorney generals don't have a real history of winning governor's races. I can't think of any AG that ever has. But I just think she's in a very good position to raise money to be the finalist against Charlie.
So in the Commonwealth, where they say that folks here know how to hold a grudge, you think that they can get over the last campaign that she ran against Scott Brown? You think that's in the rear view mirror, you think?
I do. I think so. I think Democrats want to hold on to the corner office, and they don't want to see a Republican win. So, I think right now she's the favorite.
Okay.
Steve Grossman, he could win. He can raise money. He's a serious candidate. But I think she's got a lot of things going for her that are going to be very difficult to beat.
Mr. Forry?
Yeah, you're tough on us here, aren't you? I'll just be the contrarian and go with Grossman just because Mike went with. It's always better to go second on these questions. You probably figured that out at city council debates. Yeah. But yeah, I'll make the Grossman argument, which is that the convention gives him a bump, it gives him a boost. He has deeper pockets, and he can mount a significant field organization across the state. State elected officials like him because he's been very helpful to a lot of people in this state, and he's a party favorite. So I'll say that Grossman could be the favorite going up to be the one against Charlie Baker.
Okay, then. So before we go to break, I have one other question. Then, of the remaining 3, Khayyam, Berwick, and Avalon, which one of those 3 do you think has the most potential to rise politically? And I'm going to start with you on that one.
Well, I think that Julia Khayyam, for the same reason Mike mentioned, is as a woman and somebody who can potentially catch fire Her resume lends her, I think, she has a deep well of goodwill. Let's remember too, her husband is a very accomplished person who's kind of a rising star as well. Okay. I think among the progressive Democrats, they see in her the potential for somebody to be Patrick-like. Berwick has those qualities too, and I'm sure Avalon does as well, but I'll go with Chaim on that one.
Michael?
Ditto. I think Chaim is very accomplished, and the question is, does she get 15%? And whether she can raise the money necessary.
Well, actually, I was talking about after this contest. Say those three don't make it. Also, you think if she gets the 15, she makes more of a name for herself.
I think so.
Going forward.
I mean, she'll be, if she gets 15%, and does well, then she becomes if Steve Grossman wins, he's supposed to win. If Martha Coakley wins, it'd be a serious upset. If Juliet Chaim gets 15, 16, 17%, she'll become part of the story.
Gotcha. All right, folks, we're going to go to a break. On the other side, we'll come back and we'll talk about the lieutenant governor, the attorney general's race, the treasurer, and dog catcher. I don't know. Anyway, stay tuned. We'll be right back.